yes, we want the organization to be a master at whatever it is that we're asking it to do. But we also have to realize that they're really, really new to these concepts. So what we as change agent, what we as Agilists have to be able to do is we have to be able to meet people where they are with the level of skills and understanding that they have. And it's up to us to bridge them into the new world. Pointing at them and telling them that they're resistant to change or command and control or whatever, it actually exposes our ignorance in terms of how we're thinking about things rather than indicting the people we're talking about. Okay, so I wrote this tweet for our marketing team that basically said something to the effect of like, if you organize your systems and practices around your customers and markets, a culture of agility will naturally emerge. Because, at the end of the day, Agile is really all about creating alignment. It's about making sure that we have people focused on the needs of our customers and end users and such. But I want to unpack that tweet a little bit and explore a little bit about what I'm talking about. So one of the things that I react to in the marketplace a lot, and I'm kind of softening a little bit on this approach, but a couple years ago, the way I would have said this just rather emphatically is that I would get frustrated with the idea that we want to lead with culture first. And I think it's a tough thing to lead with, because if you go into some of the organizations that we go into, functional silos, traditional PMOs, really heavy governance and control, audit, compliance, right? All those kinds of things. And you say, okay, we need to have a culture of agility. I used to do this thought exercise when I'd walk into different user groups and I'd say, okay, everybody, okay, so Agile's a culture problem. Do we agree Agile's a culture problem? If we could just get a culture of agility, everything would be great. Okay, and everybody go, oh yeah, we just need a culture of agility. And I'd say, okay, cool. So let's just say we could wave a magic wand and tomorrow we have a culture of agility. Okay, cool. So now we go into work the next day with a culture of agility. Everybody gets it. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody's willing to change. What is the first thing that you go do? Understanding we have a business to run and we have to put product in the market in the next couple months. We have to be able to make and meet commitments. We have to be able to do all these different things, right? So we've waved the magic wand. We have a culture of agility. Now what do we go do? Right? So I get frustrated in the early days of Agile because we would talk about culture because culture feels like the problem in most organizations because we want people to do Agile practices and they're resistant to the Agile practices. And so a lot of times what we do is we say, well, you're resistant to the Agile practices, so you're resistant to change, or you're a command and control leader or something like that. But a lot of times if you really get up underneath it, what's happening is that the people that are resistant really deeply understand how the organization is currently working. Some of the most interesting conversations I've had over the last 13, 14, 15 years are with like hardcore security engineers or architects that are responsible for like a 50-year-old COBOL legacy platform, something like that. And they're being told, hey, you need to do Scrum. And they're looking at that methodology in the context of the complexity that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And there is a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance because they can't see how that methodology is actually going to solve their problem. And then, fresh-faced Scrum Masters right out of CSM training or something like that is like, no, you just got to trust the process. You just got to do it. It's going to work and it's going to be great. And they're looking at these systems that they're in and they're going like, yeah, I don't see it, right? So again, just a tremendous level of cognitive dissonance. And so sometimes I think that we mistake cognitive dissonance or somebody's inability to see a credible path forward as a culture problem, right? And so I've unpacked culture a little bit, right? So So I've been doing this talk. I did it up in Detroit. I did it in Raleigh a few months ago. And I start talking to people in the room about what culture is. And about half the people think of culture really in terms of how the organization feels, like what the vibe is. And then part of the room, maybe the other half, sees it as like the behaviors, like the default DNA, like how the organization instinctively reflexes in the face of whatever's going on, right? And I think both views of culture are the same. So we want to have a good vibe. We want everybody to like coming to work. We want everybody to feel safe. And we also want the default behaviors to be open to change, and we want the mechanisms and the tools that we adopt to be incremental and iterative, and we want people to think in small batches and all these kinds of different things. So just know that culture is a lot of things, and it's different things to different people. I've read a lot of the books, and I mean, I think there are definitive definitions, but as individuals, a lot of times we're using that word pretty loosely. And so when we say we have a culture problem, my hypothesis is that we often have a cognitive dissonance problem, or we have a failure to create a clear path forward problem, which is really a cognitive dissonance problem. So we really have a cognitive dissonance problem, right? So a lot of times the way that I talk about this, it's like I understand that culture is a first order concern in a lot of these organizations. But it's not like the first place to start. So if we want people to adopt agile practices, and let's say we even believe that the culture is the problem, and maybe allow for the possibility that resistance, that cultural resistance, is not being driven by people's integrity or their value systems or whatever. Let's say that cultural resistance is entrenched process or cognitive dissonance, or not being able to see a way to make the changes that you're talking about, not seeing how in the presence of the current state of affairs, how these practices are going to make a difference, right? That's a reasonable place for somebody to be. What if we said something like, well, if we could, let's assume that there's a world where we could get the business architecture, the business capability model, the domain-driven design, the product architecture, and our teaming strategies into alignment. And so imagine a world where, like, the way the business sees the problem, the way the technology organization sees the problem, the way the product organization sees the problem, and our org design are all congruent, and nothing's working against each other. So this idea, if we organize our systems and practices around our customers and markets, that's really what I'm saying. If we could get the technology, the business, the product, the organization into alignment and create this idea of a composable enterprise or a product-driven organization, however you want to think about it, right? It's just suspend disbelief. Like, if we could get there, is there business value in it? And is that business value worth investing in? Okay, cool. So there's business value there, and that business value is worth investing in. Okay, cool. So now we look at the current state within the organization and we say, okay, cool. Like, what is the gap between where we are now and the end state, or the idealized end state of the place that we would like to be? We say, wow, okay, that gap's pretty big. That's the source of the cognitive dissonance, right? And so we say, okay, let's put a plan together for how would we incrementally and iteratively, and I say incrementally, like, what parts of the organization will we start with first? And then what would be kind of the transition patterns? That's more the iterative nature of it. And if we could incrementally make change and iteratively make change, organization by organization, work group by work group, team by team, would that be worth investing in? Like, yeah, that might be worth investing in. Then you ask yourself the question, well, if we were going to do that, could we put together a plan to do it? Could we put it on a roadmap? Could we put it on a timeline? Could we create intermediate outcomes? Could we measure progress? Could we hold people accountable to doing it? Like, yeah, you can kind of hold people accountable for creating structural changes and behavioral changes and process changes and things like that. Okay, cool. That might be good. So now what we say is okay, we know where we are. We know where we want to go. We know our initial conditions. We know our desired end conditions. We have an incremental and iterative plan for getting there. It's outcomes-based, metrics-driven. We understand at least where we would like to be. We might not get there, but we at least know where we'd like to be, so we have a baseline. And then we actually start making those changes, right? And then as we systematically make the changes and we start to adopt more of the agile practices, what I believe happens is that over time, the cognitive dissonance begins to lift. The resistance to change begins to lift. People's openness to new ideas and ways of working begins to open up because now they start to see not only that you've acknowledged the gap, you've addressed their cognitive dissonance, you've given them a plan for helping them to resolve that cognitive dissonance. And now over time, they're actually starting to see the new practices and processes start to have a positive effect on the business. And then what happens is hearts and minds start to open up. Behavior starts to change. The kinds of cultural things around like your default DNA, your default behavior patterns begin to change. The mood begins to lighten. People start to become more empowered. But I think part of the problem is that as Agilists, we get really, really excited about where we want to be and we want to get there overnight. And sometimes it's a process. I'll tell you guys a funny story. I have Tim, our marketing guy, on the phone with me right now, and I just came out of jiu-jitsu class. So Tim and I rolled jiu-jitsu together. And we were working on some moves, and the instructor that was doing the moves he's an expert, right? And he's trying to show us everything all at once. And like everybody in the class was like getting really lost. And so we were talking about at the end of class, like, yes, we want the organization to be a master at whatever it is that we're asking it to do. But we also have to realize that they're really, really new to these concepts. So what we as change agent, what we as Agilists have to be able to do is we have to be able to meet people where they are with the level of skills and understanding that they have. And it's up to us to bridge them into the new world. Pointing at them and telling them that they're resistant to change or command and control or whatever, it actually exposes our ignorance in terms of how we're thinking about things rather than indicting the people we're talking about. So that is my encouragement to you guys. So if you're in an organization that's resistant to change, just like align around a possibility, what might be true. And then really get a clear plan together for how we might make that true and get agreement to maybe run some experiments and try. Because if you can run the experiments in a way that really works and try, then you can start opening up hearts and minds. But this idea of saying, okay, it's culture first, it's everything or nothing, that just doesn't work. It's just not how people learn and it's not how organizations change. So I hope you guys have a great day and look forward to engaging with you guys in the reply.